Before the heartbreak, before the rumors, before the trembling confession that would leave fans speechless, there was simply the voice. Smooth, timeless, and unlike anything Nashville had ever heard. When Crystal Gayle first stepped into a studio microphone in the early 1970s, no one expected the quiet young woman from a Kentucky coal mining family to rewrite what country music could sound like. But she did, not with rebellion, not with volume, but with grace. Born Brenda Gayle Webb, the youngest of 8 children in the Webb household, she grew up in a world where survival came before dreams. Her father worked in the mines. Her mother raised a family that would one day shape the sound of American country music. Her older sister, Loretta Lynn, was already a phenomenon, a fiery, unfiltered truth-teller whose songs mirrored the struggles of working women everywhere. While Loretta sang about hardship and heartbreak, Brenda, soon to be Crystal, dreamed of something softer, something shimmering, something that sounded like sunlight breaking through coal dust. It wasn't easy to live in a shadow as large as Loretta's. The comparisons were constant. Every performance, every interview, every recording, someone always asked about her sister. But Crystal was determined to create her own identity. Loretta, to her credit, encouraged it. She famously told her younger sister, "Don't sing what I sing, find your own voice." And Crystal did exactly that. Her tone was silky, effortless, part country, part pop, all emotion. By the time Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue hit the airwaves in 1977, Crystal Gayle was no longer just Loretta Lynn's sister. She was an icon in her own right, a Grammy winner, a crossover superstar, and a symbol of elegance in an era of grit. Her long, floor-length hair became a signature, a visual metaphor for the calm, composed strength she carried into every stage performance. Fans adored her not just for her voice, but for her presence. While other stars leaned into drama or rebellion, Crystal was a vision of serenity. She didn't shout, she didn't posture. She sang with a calm that disarmed you. That serenity, though, came with a price. Behind the flawless image, behind the smooth delivery and soft smile, there were fears, insecurities, and a lifetime of expectations that few ever saw. The world saw perfection, but Crystal, she saw pressure. To stay graceful, to stay flawless, to never let the cracks show. And for decades, she succeeded, until recently, when all of that composure began to crumble in the most human way possible. Because even legends can only stay silent for so long. And that silence, after years of guarding her truth, was about to be broken. For more than 4 decades, Crystal Gayle's life was defined by what the public didn't know. While tabloids hunted scandals and gossip, Crystal stayed almost invisible off stage. No arrests, no breakdowns, no feuds, just the music. Her calmness became her armor, a quiet rebellion against the chaos that often consumes fame. But the cost of keeping everything private was heavy, and over time, that polished surface began to hide something deeper: exhaustion, grief, and unspoken fear. Even in interviews, fans noticed how Crystal always redirected questions away from herself. If asked about struggles, she'd smile and mention gratitude. When asked about aging, she changed the subject to new projects. It wasn't denial, it was survival. "The world doesn't need to see me cry," she once said in a rare candid moment. But what no one realized was that behind the scenes, she was crying over loss, over fear, and over the weight of being the last voice still standing from a generation that had shaped country music's golden age. When Loretta Lynn passed, The world mourned a legend, but for Crystal, it was personal. It was the loss of not just a sister, but a mentor, the person who had believed in her long before the world ever did. And with Loretta's passing came something darker, the reminder of her family's fragile health. Over the years, the Webb siblings had faced numerous medical struggles, many believed to be hereditary. Crystal, who had spent her life performing with poise and perfection, suddenly found herself wondering if her body was keeping secrets her heart didn't want to hear. She began to feel changes. Dizzy spells, moments of imbalance on stage, fatigue that lingered long after the spotlight dimmed. At first, she brushed it off. "I'm just tired," she told her team. But quietly, she started undergoing tests, neurological scans, blood work, long visits with specialists. For a woman who had always kept her emotions private, this was the beginning of a storm. And when the results began to hint at something hereditary, something possibly connected to her family's history, she knew she could no longer hide behind her perfect smile. Her fans always saw her as composed. But when she finally decided to speak, the composure cracked. In an emotional sit-down interview, Crystal revealed what she had kept secret for years. That fear had followed her quietly like a shadow. That she had lived decades performing through discomfort and uncertainty. That her greatest struggle wasn't fame or competition or age. It was confronting the truth about her own body. And yet, even as she revealed the pain, her voice stayed steady. "I've always believed in hope," she said softly. "But this time, I needed to face the truth." It wasn't just a confession, it was liberation. The perfectionist, the quiet star, the angelic voice, was finally human before the world. And what came next would turn that moment of honesty into one of the most emotional reckonings in country music history. That interview, the one where Crystal Gayle finally spoke about her fears, was more than just a moment of vulnerability. It was a turning point. Fans had always seen her as untouchable, a symbol of calm in a noisy world. But when she began to open up about her health, something inside her, and in the hearts of those watching, shifted forever. As her trembling voice filled the room, Crystal spoke of her family's long history with illness, the kind that doesn't just haunt the body, but the memory. She mentioned Loretta's health struggles, the passing of her brother Herman, and the quiet dread she'd carried, knowing that the same blood flowed through her veins. For years, she'd pushed those thoughts away, burying herself in her music and her fans. But as time caught up, denial was no longer an option. "You can't outsing your fears," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The world was stunned. This was the same woman who for decades had never missed a show, never let her pain show on stage, and never once complained publicly about the toll of constant touring. Now she was admitting that some nights she could barely stand under the stage lights. She spoke of dizzy spells so strong that she had to hold on to stage props to steady herself. "I didn't want pity," she said. "I just wanted to sing." The confession hit harder because it was so human. Here was a woman who had lived most of her life in a spotlight that allowed no weakness, now daring to let the cracks show. And those cracks didn't make her smaller. They made her real. Fans took to social media by the thousands, sharing messages of love, shock, and gratitude. They weren't disappointed. They were inspired. But beneath the surface of empathy and support, a different kind of whisper began to spread. Some wondered if this was the beginning of the end. If Crystal's health revelation was a prelude to something larger. Was she preparing to step away from music? Was this her way of saying goodbye? For Crystal, however, it wasn't about an ending. It was about truth. "I spent my whole life being strong," she told one interviewer. But sometimes, strength means admitting you're scared. Those words stayed with her fans long after the cameras stopped rolling. They marked a rare moment in country music, when one of its most polished stars shed her perfection and revealed the woman behind the legend. And yet, the story didn't stop there, because while the world saw a moment of vulnerability, what Crystal did next proved that her confession wasn't a collapse, it was a transformation. She had faced her fears in private. Now she was about to confront them in public, on stage, under the same lights that had once hidden her pain. The next time Crystal Gayle walked on stage, things were different. To the audience, she was still the same timeless figure. Flowing hair, sparkling gown, that familiar warmth radiating through every note. But inside, she carried the weight of what she had shared. The knowledge that everyone now saw her not just as an icon, but as a woman battling something she could no longer hide. And yet, when the music started, her voice was steady. If anything, it was deeper, fuller, more fragile, but in that fragility, there was power. Fans later said that her performance that night felt like she was singing not to entertain, but to heal. Each lyric, each note carried years of restraint, finally released. For decades, Crystal had built an image of unshakable grace. She rarely broke character, never let emotions spill over, even when the memories of family loss or personal struggle pressed close. Every public appearance was perfectly composed. The smile, the posture, the poise. But what few realized was that perfection had a price. Behind that curtain of calm was a woman terrified of being misunderstood. The stage had always been her sanctuary, but it was also her cage. Every time she stumbled, she feared judgment. Every time she felt weak, she feared pity. And so she learned to conceal, to turn her vulnerabilities into melodies. "I think that's why people said my songs felt comforting," she once explained. "I was singing through my pain." But as her health concerns grew, so did her desire to be real. She began speaking to her bandmates more openly about her struggles. She'd joke gently about forgetting lyrics or feeling unsteady, turning fear into laughter. And the more she shared, the lighter she seemed. The woman who had once been terrified to appear flawed was now standing in her truth, finding strength in transparency. It was around this time that close friends noticed another change. Crystal began talking about Loretta more often. She revisited old memories, told stories she hadn't shared in years, and often said she felt her sister's presence guiding her. "Loretta always told me not to pretend," she said during a backstage conversation. She said people don't fall in love with perfection, they fall in love with honesty. That line, more than anything, became her quiet mantra. And while the world was still processing her emotional revelation, Crystal was already taking the next step, one that would bridge her past and her future. One last promise between two sisters who had changed country music forever. Because what began as a confession was slowly turning into something else. A farewell, a reckoning, and a promise she intended to keep. After that raw confession and her quiet shift toward honesty, something deep inside Crystal Gayle began to awaken. The curtain of perfection had finally lifted, and for the first time in decades, she wasn't hiding behind the spotlight. She was stepping into it as herself. And at the heart of that transformation was one person who had always seen her truth, even when she couldn't see it herself. Her sister, Loretta Lynn. In the months following Loretta's passing, Crystal found herself replaying old conversations in her mind. They'd spent a lifetime balancing love and rivalry. Two sisters shaped by the same dirt roads of Butcher Hollow, both destined to sing, yet walking such different paths. Loretta's songs were fiery and fearless, while Crystal's voice was soft and angelic. But underneath those contrasts was a bond no distance or fame could break. Crystal often spoke about how Loretta had pushed her to stay authentic. "Don't let Nashville turn you into something you're not," Loretta once told her. "The fans love you for your truth, not your image." Those words, once just sisterly advice, took on new meaning after Loretta was gone. It was almost as if her sister's voice had become her conscience, whispering reminders that it was okay to let people see her real self. The woman behind the perfect hair and the graceful smile. In one interview, Crystal's voice cracked as she said, "Before she passed, Loretta told me, 'Don't hide from the truth, even when it hurts. Fans can tell when your heart's not in it.'" That simple line became her promise, not just to her sister, but to herself. She decided that from that point on, every word she sang and every appearance she made would be genuine, unfiltered, and honest. That promise began to reshape her world. She stopped trying to look flawless in every photo. She started reconnecting with old friends she hadn't seen in years. And most importantly, she began revisiting songs she had written decades ago. Songs too personal to release when she was young. Songs that revealed more of Brenda Webb than Crystal Gayle. But this emotional awakening wasn't only about grief. It was about gratitude. Crystal started to see her sister's legacy not as a shadow, but as a guiding light. She realized that Loretta's strength had given her permission to finally be vulnerable. And as she leaned into that vulnerability, she began to heal. Still, behind the healing was a quiet undertone, a sense that she was preparing for something final. Something that would honor Loretta's memory, fulfill her own promise of truth, and possibly close the chapter she had been writing since the 1970s. Fans didn't know it yet, but Crystal's transformation was leading towards something that would shake the country music world once again. A farewell wrapped in melody. Because when Crystal Gayle made a promise, she kept it. And the next chapter of her journey would prove that even in goodbye, she was still singing for the people she loved most. As Crystal began to live her truth more openly, fans could feel the shift, not just in her interviews, but in her performances, her tone, and even her silence. There was a new depth in her voice, a bittersweet weight that hinted at reflection, closure, and something that felt almost like farewell. But at the time, no one dared to say it out loud. Then came the moment that sent the rumor mill spinning. On her official social media page, her team posted a cryptic message that simply read, "A final curtain call may be closer than we think." Within hours, fans flooded the comments, begging for clarity. Was Crystal retiring? Was her health worsening? Or was this message about something entirely different? The uncertainty sent shockwaves through the country music community. For decades, Crystal Gayle had been a symbol of consistency, never scandalous, never unpredictable. But this message felt different. It felt final. And while Crystal didn't immediately confirm anything, her next actions spoke volumes. Shortly after, she was spotted in Butcher Hollow, Kentucky, the small mining town where her family's story began. Locals described seeing her quietly walking through the old Webb family home, her hands brushing over framed photographs, her eyes filled with emotion. To them, it looked less like a visit and more like a goodbye. It felt like she was closing a chapter, one resident said softly. When asked later about the visit, Crystal's answer was simple yet profound. "I just needed to reconnect with where it all began. Sometimes you have to look back before you can move forward." That one sentence ignited an emotional firestorm online. Fans began to speculate that Crystal was preparing to retire, that she wanted her final project to bring her journey full circle, back to the hills of Kentucky, where her story first began. At the same time, whispers began circulating about a deeply personal recording project taking shape in her Nashville home studio. Insiders claimed it wasn't just another album. It was a reflection of her entire life. A musical letter to her roots, her family, her faith, and to the fans who had stood by her for half a century. Rumors spread that this collection would be called Echoes of Home. As all of this unfolded, Crystal remained calm and mysterious. She didn't deny the speculation, but she didn't confirm it either. Instead, she continued appearing in select performances, each one carrying a subtle sense of finality. A look, a pause, a word of gratitude that hinted at something bigger coming to an end. For her fans, the idea of her walking away from the stage was unthinkable. But for Crystal, it wasn't about walking away. It was about walking home. Every lyric she had ever sung, every melody she had ever written, traced back to that small town in Kentucky. And as she retraced her steps, she wasn't mourning the end of her career. She was celebrating the story that built it. Still, the whispers didn't stop. The word retirement hung in the air like a haunting refrain, and soon, speculation reached a fever pitch. But behind the mystery, something far more beautiful was unfolding. A project that would turn those whispers into a final, unforgettable harmony between two sisters, one on earth and one in memory. Because Crystal Gayle wasn't just saying goodbye. She was getting ready to sing one last song, one that would echo through generations. As whispers of retirement continued to swirl, Crystal Gayle remained characteristically graceful in her silence. She didn't rush to confirm or deny anything. Instead, she did what she'd always done best. She let her music speak for her. Behind closed doors, a quiet yet monumental project was unfolding, one that would become not only her final masterpiece, but a love letter to everything that defined her life. It began with a phone call to a longtime producer and family friend. She told him she wanted to make something pure, something that sounded like the earth beneath her feet in Butcher Hollow. No digital perfection, no modern studio polish, just raw, organic sound. Guitars that creaked, harmonies that wavered with emotion, and lyrics that felt like the pages of an old family diary. That was the birth of Echoes of Home. In this project, Crystal didn't just sing, she revisited her soul. Each song became a reflection of her journey, from the barefoot girl who grew up listening to the wind hum through the holler, to the woman who conquered the world stage while never forgetting the dirt roads that raised her. One track reportedly featured never-before-heard recordings of her and Loretta Lynn singing together. A haunting duet that fans described as spiritual. Even before its release, every lyric in Echoes of Home carried a story. One song spoke about the long drives home from Nashville, where Crystal would roll down the window just to smell the air of Kentucky again. Another, titled Front Porch Lights, captured the image of her mother waiting by the window, praying for her daughter's safety while they chased dreams that seemed bigger than the sky itself. What made this album extraordinary wasn't just the nostalgia, it was the honesty. For the first time in decades, Crystal didn't sing as a star. She sang as Brenda Webb, the coal miner's daughter's sister, the dreamer who once stood barefoot on a gravel road, wondering if her voice could ever carry far enough to be heard. When her team first heard the complete project, the room reportedly fell silent. There were tears, quiet nods, and an unspoken understanding that this wasn't just another record. It was her goodbye. Not to the fans, but to the stage that had defined her life. And when the announcement finally came, a heartfelt message confirming Echoes of Home as her final studio album, the reaction from fans around the world was overwhelming. Thousands of comments poured in, filled with gratitude, love, and heartbreak. Many said they felt like they were losing a piece of their own past, the soundtrack of their youth fading into memory. But for Crystal, this was never about endings. It was about coming full circle. In her own words, this isn't a farewell, it's a thank you. Every note, every word, every breath on this record is my way of saying, you were my home all along. And just as the world prepared to let her go, something unexpected happened. A new spark began to flicker, something that hinted that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end after all. Even as Echoes of Home made its quiet, graceful descent into history, something about the way it resonated with people took Crystal by surprise. The emotional response was unlike anything she'd seen in years. Fans from every generation, young and old alike, began rediscovering her catalog. Her streaming numbers skyrocketed. Suddenly, videos of Crystal and Loretta's old performances were trending again. But one song in particular changed everything. It was a track tucked near the end of Echoes of Home, simply titled, If I Could Tell Her. Written during one of Crystal's late-night studio sessions, the song was an unfiltered letter to Loretta. It was soft, sorrowful, and deeply personal. A melody that felt like it was meant to be whispered rather than sung. The lyrics spoke of missed phone calls, unspoken apologies, and the eternal bond between sisters who loved each other fiercely, even when they didn't always understand one another. When the song's live performance premiered online, it didn't just touch fans, it broke them. In the middle of the final chorus, Crystal's voice cracked. She stopped singing for a moment, looked up, and whispered, "This one's for you, sis." That simple moment, unscripted, real, raw, became one of the most shared clips of her career. Millions of people viewed it within days. Suddenly, what had been her farewell became a new beginning. Country radio picked up the song, calling it the most heartfelt performance of her lifetime. Younger artists began paying tribute to her influence. Within weeks, If I Could Tell Her had become an anthem for everyone who had lost someone they loved, but never stopped carrying them in their heart. What happened next shocked everyone, even Crystal. Industry insiders began urging her to go on one final tour, not for fame or money, but as a celebration. A homecoming tour, they called it. And to everyone's surprise, Crystal said yes. If it's meant to honor her, she told reporters, then I'll sing till my voice gives out. That tour wasn't about chart hits or glamour. It was about connection. Small venues, heartfelt stories, and a chance for fans to say thank you in person. In each city, Crystal would perform If I Could Tell Her. And every time she did, the audience sang along softly, as if part of something sacred. And when the final show came, back in Kentucky, under the same stars that once listened to her dreams, Crystal ended the night the way she began her career. Barefoot, simple, and honest. "This isn't goodbye," she said, smiling through tears. "This is me finally coming home." The crowd stood in silence for a moment, before erupting into applause that seemed to last forever. It wasn't just for the legend she had become. It was for the woman who never stopped being real. In that moment, the story came full circle. The girl who once sang her way out of the holler had found her way back, not to the stage lights, but to her truth. And in doing so, Crystal Gayle didn't just end her story, She made sure it would never fade.